Chapter 1. The Mysterious Letter Opener. The gas lamps of Upper Wimpole Street cast a pale, wavering glow across the rain-slicked pavement as I hurried along in the gathering dusk. The air was heavy with the promise of an autumnal storm, and said the familiar clatter of cab wheels on cobbles seemed subdued by the thickening fog. I had received a telegram from my old friend Hercule Poirot that afternoon, a summons of urgent import, and now, with lantern in hand, I approached his residence at number 21B. I knocked promptly at 6:30, and within moments the door swung open to reveal Poirot's diminutive figure, resplendent in a perfectly pressed charcoal morning coat and silk cravat. His waxed moustaches curled in greeting, and his keen black eyes shone with that unmistakable spark of curiosity. "Mon ami Hastings, you arrive at an auspicious moment," he announced, ushering me into the warm lamplight of his study. The room was arranged with its customary precision. Shelves of leather-bound volumes lining the walls, a small bureau meticulously organized with writing materials, and, on the central desk, an object that drew my immediate attention. A letter opener lay atop a folded sheet of cream paper, the handle, fashioned from what appeared to be polished ebony, terminated in the delicate sculpt of a serpent's head, its eyes set with tiny garnets that seemed to glint malevolently in the lamplight. The blade was slender and razor-sharp, its steel surface immaculate, save for a single spot of tarnish near the hilt. "Allow me," Poirot said, lifting the implement with gloved fingers. He turned it this way and that, his gaze narrowing. "Note, Hastings, how the craftsmanship bespeaks the hand of a master artisan. Yet the design is unusual, somewhere between classical elegance and the macabre. A gift intended to flatter the intellect, perhaps, yet to warn the recipient of lurking danger." I drew closer. "It is certainly striking, mon ami, but why has it come to you?" Poirot folded his hands and regarded me thoughtfully. "It has not come to me, but through me. This morning I received a visitor, an elderly lady, trembling and in tears. She entrusted this letter opener to me, requesting that I discover its secret. I promised to do my best. Now, Hastings, let us unravel the mystery." I set the kettle to boil and poured 2 cups of tea, watching as Poirot fingered the tiny serpents, I turning it until the garnet caught the light once more. "Tell me everything," he said, settling back in his armchair with a satisfied air. His client identified herself as Mrs. Edith Farnsworth, widow of a retired naval officer. She had explained that the letter opener was a family heirloom, passed down through generations of Farnsworth men, and had recently come into her possession upon her husband's passing. But in the fortnight since her husband's death, she had experienced a series of unnerving occurrences. Whispers in the stillness of the night, the sense of being watched, and a most disturbing incident, a letter, penned in an unfamiliar hand, delivered under cover of darkness, forbidding her to meddle with the opener's inmost secret. At first she dismissed it as a prank, Poirot continued, yet last night, as she retired to her bed at her country home in Surrey, she awakened to find the letter opener balanced precariously upon her dressing-table mirror, the blade pointed directly at her reflection. He paused, eyes alight with the thrill of the puzzle. "But the most curious element, Hastings, lies hidden upon the blade itself. Observe." He laid the opener on the desk before him, turning it so that the tarnished spot caught the glow of the shaded lamp. With a small jeweller's loupe, an instrument I had not noticed in his desk before, Poirot examined the blemish. "Ah," he murmured, "not tarnish at all, but a minuscule inscription, barely visible to the naked eye. Fira, in lucem." I peered over his shoulder. "Latin, fire into light, or perhaps strike into light," I suggested. "Precisely, Hastings. But what can it signify? A motto? A clue? And why the serpent motif?" He leaned forward, hands steepled. "We must learn who crafted this, and more importantly, for what purpose. I intend to begin tonight." The storm broke then. A sudden clap of thunder rattling the window panes, and rain spattered against the glass. Poirot rose and crossed to the window, drawing aside the curtain to peer into the gloom. "London is restless tonight," he observed. "There is something in the air, a charge that quickens the senses. We may find that our adversary moves swiftly." I set our tea on the desk as he returned. "You think this matter could involve foul play?" "Monsieur Hastings," he said gravely, "when a lady fears for her safety and receives threats by letter, one must take heed. Even an object as innocent as a letter-opener can become an instrument of terror." He examined the blade once more, his fingertips tracing the engraved words. "Fira in lucem. We shall need to consult several experts. An antiquarian for the year handle, a scholar of Latin for the inscription, and perhaps, if we are fortunate, a silversmith who can trace the steel's origin." He looked up, eyes bright. "But first we must speak with Mrs. Farnsworth herself. I shall draft a note to her immediately. You, Hastings, will deliver it and return with her testimony. We depart at once." I was more than ready. The prospect of a fresh case delighted me, and I could scarce recall a more intriguing object. As I donned my coat, Poirot took the letter-opener and gently slid it into a velvet-lined case. "Remember, Hastings," he said, placing a gloved hand upon my shoulder, "the smallest detail may prove to be the key. We must observe everything. Let nothing escape our notice." With that, I left the warmth of 21B and stepped once more into the rain-washed London night, carrying with me the slender case that held within its velvet folds the first secret of our mystery, and the promise of danger yet to come. Chapter 2. The Widow's Tale. The journey to Farnsworth Manor in Surrey proved less arduous than I had anticipated. Monsieur Poirot and I boarded the 8:15 express from Victoria Station, seating ourselves in a first-class compartment trimmed in burgundy velvet. Outside the window, the city's Victorian facades gave way to rolling green hills and neatly hedged orchards. The air was crisp and sweet with the scent of damp earth. Poirot, seated opposite me, unfolded the telegram that had summoned us and reread its terse lines with a thoughtful frown. "I find, Hastings," he observed, "that an invitation couched in polite urgency often hides more anxiety than a plea dispatched by post." He tapped the paper lightly. "But come, let us not linger on such trifles. We have a lady awaiting our counsel, and each moment counts." At Guildford, we changed to a carriage that conveyed us along a winding lane, flanked by ancient oaks. The driver spoke little, merely nodding when asked how far the manor lay. 10 minutes more, sir, if the roads stay clear of mud." A distant roll of thunder spoke of the storm, yet to break. I glanced at Poirot, who smiled amiably. Nature herself conspires with our case, Hastings. An ominous sky for an ominous mystery. Farnsworth Manor came into view as a stately Georgian house with pale stone walls and tall mullioned windows. Vines crept along the facade, their crimson leaves clinging like tendrils of warning. A semicircular drive led to a portico supported by slender columns, beneath which stood a slim, stooped figure draped in a sable cloak, Mrs. Edith Farnsworth herself. Her silver hair was pinned beneath a widow's bonnet, and though her face was lined with grief, her eyes bore the bright intensity of a woman determined to confront fear. Mr. Hastings, Monsieur Poirot, she curtsied with trembling grace as we descended from the carriage. I am so grateful you have come. She spoke with a soft yet urgent accent, a hint perhaps of distant French lineage. Poirot bowed in return, noting carefully the set of her shoulders and the nervous clasping of her gloved hands. Madam, he said gently, we shall do everything in our power to put you at ease. Please lead us to the study. Mrs. Farnsworth's nod seemed almost involuntary as she steered us through a dim hallway adorned with ancestral portraits. The gaze of long-dead Farnsworth men followed us from gilded frames, their powdered wigs and frock coats lending the air of a silent tribunal. Ticournefalt's study lay at the east end of the house, a spacious chamber with oak panels and a high ceiling from which a brass chandelier dangled. A heavy mahogany desk faced the window, its surface scarred by decades of use. A single lamp cast a pool of light over a scattering of papers, an inkstand, and set askew the ebony-handled letter opener we had examined in London. Mrs. Farnsworth closed the door behind us, then sank into a winged armchair, her bonnet falling back to reveal a pale, drawn countenance. "Please," she began, voice quavering, "sit. I fear I may seem foolish, but I have no one else to turn to." She swallowed, eyes brimming with tears. Poirot exchanged a glance with me, and motioned for a servant to leave fresh tea and biscuits on a side table. Once alone with us, she clasped her hands in her lap. "Since my husband's sudden death 2 weeks ago," she said, "I have lived in dread. It began with whispers at night, soft, indistinct, as though carried on the wind. Then I found this letter on my dressing table." She reached beneath the chair and withdrew a folded sheet of parchment, hands shaking so that the paper trembled. I took it gently and unfolded the note. The handwriting was elegant yet angular. "Cease your prying, widow, lest the serpents you unleash coil back upon you." Beneath the text, a single red droplet, dried ink or perhaps a smudge, stared accusingly. Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, have you any idea who might harbour such enmity?" She pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. "None. My husband, Captain, Charles Farnsworth, was a kind man. He bore no enemies that I know of." Her voice cracked. And yet I feel that old grudges, perhaps among his former naval associates, may reach beyond the grave." Poirot rose and circled the desk. "May I examine your husband's papers? Anything, letters, diaries, perhaps a memorandum of debts or disputes?" Mrs. Farnsworth nodded, pointing to a small leather-bound journal lying beneath the blotter. He opened it, scanning page after page of neat entries in her husband's hand. weather reports, family expenses, occasional references to business with Mr. Conroy, and meeting with General Bertram. One entry, dated a week before his death, caught his attention. Received package from Waybridge. Handle with care. Inspect mechanism tomorrow. He closed the journal with a precise snap. Waybridge. There is a town near here by that name. A workshop, perhaps. And this package, might that be our letter opener? Mrs. Farnsworth looked startled. He received it only days before he died. He never spoke of it to me. Her voice dropped. That same night, he complained of a headache and retired early. I found him dead at dawn, slumped over this desk. I bent to inspect the desk's surface, noting a slight discoloration around the shallow groove where the journal rested. Closer still, I discerned faint scorch marks, tiny parallels running lengthwise. Monsieur Poirot, I remarked, could this perhaps be from a heated implement? My wife's curling iron leaves similar marks on her dressing table. He nodded, eyes alight. An intriguing observation, Hastings. It suggests that the letter opener, or another metal object, was heated, perhaps to seal wax or as a means of intimidation. And these scorch marks align directly beneath where Mr. Farnsworth wrote. Someone may have applied heat to drive fear into the victim, or to manipulate the metal. Mrs. Farnsworth shuddered. Good heavens, I had not noticed. But, Monsieur Poirot, what should we do? I cannot remain here alone. Fear not, madame, Poirot replied, replacing the journal in its place. We shall stay until you are out of danger. First, I wish to speak with your staff, the butler, Mr. Crandall, and the housemaid, Miss Ellsworth. They may have observed something. He turned to me. Hastings, would you kindly venture to the east wing? The servants' quarters lie beyond. The dining hall. Bring them here, one at a time, for private questioning. I bowed and left the study, glancing back to see Poirot offering Mrs. Farnsworth a reassuring smile. In that instant, I sensed that the little Belgian had already begun to weave the threads of deduction. Moments later, I escorted Mr. Crandall, a stooped man in sober livery, into the study. His expression was respectful yet wary. Poirot greeted him kindly and invited him to sit, as I recorded his replies to our preliminary questions, his duties, his hours, whether he heard or saw anything unusual. Poirot's gaze remained fixed on the servant's hands and posture. Every blink, every twitch, he noted with that uncanny intensity for which he was renowned. By the time Miss Ellsworth, a pale girl of 17, glided in, carrying a tray of milk for tea, the first flutters of revelation had begun to stir in my friend's mind. He asked her about the late captain's habits, his correspondence, and whether she had observed any visitors from Waybridge. She shook her head, but her fingers trembled as she set down the tray. The room seemed charged with unspoken tension. When the questioning concluded, Poirot dismissed them with gratitude and turned his attention back to Mrs. Farnsworth. Madame, he said softly, I believe there is more at play here than mere superstition. We have a letter of threat, scorch marks upon the desk, and a mysterious inscription on the opener. Tomorrow we shall visit Waybridge together and inspect the workshop where this implement was made. Until then, please retire to your chamber, and you shall have a companion, either myself or Mr. Hastings, until the matter is resolved. Mrs. Farnsworth rose, relief evident in her softened features. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You give me hope. As she departed, Poirot turned to me. "Hastings, observe how she clings to that handkerchief. Nervous habits reveal more than words. Tomorrow we follow the trail to Waybridge. Tonight we prepare." He tapped the notes he had made. "The widow's tale has set us upon the path. May it lead swiftly to the heart of our mystery." I settled into a chair beside the desk, staring at the serpent's head of the letter-opener, gleaming menacingly in the lamplight. In the hush of Farnsworth Manor, I felt the first real gust of wind from the storm of secrets that lay ahead. Tomorrow we would chase clues through winding lanes and musty workshops. Tonight, however, we must rest and steel ourselves for the revelations to come. Chapter 3. Secrets of the Waybridge Workshop. The following morning dawned grey and blustery, as though nature herself had conspired to cloak our journey in apprehension. Monsieur Poirot and I set out by motor car, the winding Surrey lanes slick with overnight rain. The coachman, Mr. Bennet, drove with cautious skill, for the road to Waybridge was narrow and bordered by ancient hedgerows heavy with tangled briars. At each bend the wind sighed through the trees, and I fancied I could hear distant echoes of the serpent's hiss. Poirot sat beside me, gloved hands folded in his lap, gazing out the window with that far-off expression of intense observation. "Note, Hastings," he said softly, "how the workman's workshop sits at the very edge of town, between river and railway. Such a location favours discretion. Deliveries by boat, raw materials by train, finished wares by hand." He tapped, his fingers together. "A man who values privacy, or who fears unwanted inquiries." We arrived at the small industrial quarter by mid-morning. A low red brick building bore a modest sign in fading gilt letters. E. Bramley and Sons, Fine Metalwork. The doorway was flanked by broad windows obscured by heavy curtains. A single chimney rose from the roof, its smoke curling lazily toward the overcast sky. Poirot slipped from the car and strode to the door, his gait purposeful. Inside, the workshop was a cavernous space of timber beams and iron machinery. The air hung with coppery scents and the tang of heated metal. Near the entrance stood a stout man wiping his hands on a grimy rag. His cap sat low over coal-black hair, and his eyes narrowed with curiosity as we approached. "Bonjour, monsieur," Poirot greeted, inclining his head. "I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my colleague, Mr. Hastings. We have come regarding a recent commission, a letter-opener bearing a serpent's head, and bearing the inscription Fira in Lucem. We wish to learn its provenance." The man blinked, gaze shifting from Poirot's waxed moustache to his immaculate gloves. "You mean the ebony-handled opener?" "Yes, sir. It was crafted here. My name is Edward Bramley, junior partner to my father, Roland Bramley." He stepped forward, voice gruff but respectful. "May I see a sketch or photograph?" Poirot produced a pencil sketch of the serpent's head edged into the leather case. Bramley studied it, lips pursed. "Yes, that's ours. I recall forging it by order of one Captain Farnsworth. He came personally to collect it, an elderly gentleman, severe in manner. That was some weeks ago. He beckoned us deeper into the workshop. Rows of workbenches displayed half-finished wares, silver letter-openers in floral motifs, intricately chased desk sets, and a series of steel desk knives whose handles took the form of various animals. Poirot's gaze flicked from one to another. "Remark the consistent quality of line, Hastings, the serpent's curve, the tension in its coiled body. Bramley, did your design specify a serpent, or was that your suggestion?" Bramley guided us to his bench. "The gentleman requested something classical, with an edge of danger. He mentioned serpents in his family crest. My father sketched the initial concept. I executed it. The handle is ebony from Sierra Leone. The blade carbon, steel tempered here in our forge." Poirot tapped the loop hanging at his waist. "And the inscription, was that added here?" Bramley's face clouded. "No, sir. We only inlay a maker's mark, E&B 1847, on the reverse. I never heard of any Latin motto. That must have been done elsewhere." I exchanged a look with Poirot. "So the inscription was not part of your commission?" "Not to my knowledge," Bramley repeated. "Though after we finished the opener, I did hear talk. My father muttered that Captain Farnsworth seemed uneasy that day. He inspected the blade closely, then hurried off without paying much heed. To the price?" Poirot nodded, swivelling to survey the adjacent furnace. "The temper of the steel appears flawless, yet on our examination of the Farnsworth desk, we noted scorch marks beneath the inscription. Do you ever apply heat treatments or stampings that could leave such marks?" Bramley rubbed his chin. "Heat treatments, yes, but always beneath the guard. To have scorch marks on a desk, the metal must have been pressed hot against wood. We wouldn't do that. It would warp the metal." He frowned. "Whoever did that must have intended to leave a mark, literal and figurative." Poirot's eyebrows lifted. "A message, perhaps." He turned back to Bramley. "May we see where you store completed pieces before dispatch?" The younger man led us through a narrow corridor to a storage loft. There, crates of finished items were labelled for delivery to clients across England. Among them, Poirot spotted one small crate marked CF, Private. He pried it open, revealing an assortment of personal desk accessories, penholders, blotters, and at the bottom, the velvet-lined box we had brought from Farnsworth Manor. The opener lay nestled within, sentinel-like. I leaned closer, noting tiny flecks of red enamel on the interior of the box lid. "Monsieur Poirot, look here, spots of red, matching the smear on Mrs. Farnsworth's threatening letter." He plucked the opener from its cushion, turning it in his gloved hand. "Remarkable, Hastings. The very same droplet. Someone handled both opener and letter. The maker's workshop retains no record of Latin inscriptions, yet the box reveals the smear. Could the craftsperson have been pressed into forging a second inscription? Or is someone tampering post-creation?" Bramley shifted uneasily. I know nothing of any inscription. If you suspect tampering, you must speak with my father. He handles the accounts and dispatch." Poirot and I descended from the loft to the main floor, where Roland Bramley, a lean, austere gentleman in spectacles, stood polishing a brass inkstand. His eyes narrowed at the sight of his son. "Edward, you summoned me." The two men exchanged curt nods. Poirot introduced himself and explained the situation. The elder Bramley listened, hands folded behind his back, his visage inscrutable. When informed of the Latin inscription and the scorch marks, his lips twitched. "I confirm what my son said. We did not inscribe Latin mottos. We only stamp our mark. Yet," he paused, I recall an elderly gentleman, dour of countenance, who queried the cost of extra ornamentation. He hinted at a personal design, but I refused. We proceed only by the sketch. Poirot studied him for a moment. You refused? But the serpent handle is exactly as the gentleman requested. Bramley Senior inclined his head. Yes, but nothing beyond that. No inscription, no hidden mechanisms. He tapped a finger against his temple. I have spent a lifetime in metal. I know the limits of my craft. If there is a secret, it was added elsewhere. Poirot bowed. Thank you, Mr. Bramley. You have been most forthcoming. He turned to me. Hastings, we have learned 3 important facts. First, the serpent handle was requested by Captain Farnsworth himself. Second, the Latin inscription was not applied. Here, third, the smear of red enamel ties the box to the threatening letter. I nodded, though my mind churned. But who would have had both access to the letter and the opener to add the inscription afterward? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Someone close to Mrs. Farnsworth's household, or perhaps a visitor to her late husband. We must consider all. Who could slip the blade and letter to her undetected? But first, I wish to examine the box itself more closely. Where did you obtain the velvet lining? Edward Bramley led us back to the loft, opened another crate, and removed a bolt of deep blue velvet. We keep this on hand for special commissions, he explained. Poirot pressed his gloved finger into the pile, studying the weave. Note how the pile is slightly crushed in one corner, matching the curve of the serpent's head. And here, he pointed, a small patch where the dye faded. That patch corresponds exactly to where the letter opener's handle sat. He withdrew a scrap of velvet and held it to the light. This cannot be a coincidence, Hastings. The box, the smear, the faded dye, all indicate a second hand at work. Someone opened the case, handled the blade, applied the inscription, perhaps using a fine etching tool, and then replaced it, leaving a telltale trace. I shivered. But why? To frighten Mrs. Farnsworth, or to hide something within the blade itself? Poirot replaced the velvet and closed the crate firmly. Both possibilities warrant investigation. Hastings, we must return to Farnsworth Manor and search the blade for a hidden compartment or mechanism. Additionally, I shall write to the Latin scholar at Oxford this very afternoon, requesting his opinion on fera in lucem. There may be nuances we have yet to consider. As we bid the Bramleys farewell, the workshop bell tinkled behind us. Outside, the sky had darkened further, the wind now moaning through the chimney stacks. I glanced at Poirot, whose moustaches quivered in anticipation. Our net widens, Hastings. The serpent coils still, and its secret beckons. We climbed back into the waiting motor car, leaving the grimy chimneys and polished metalwork to fade into the distance. Ahead lay Farnsworth Manor, where the letter opener awaited its next scrutiny, and where, I sensed, our mystery would grow in depth and danger. Chapter 4. A Message from Oxford. The late afternoon sun cast a wan light through the mullioned windows of Farnsworth Manor as Poirot, and I returned from the motor car, our spirits alight with the promise of fresh clues. The journey from Waybridge had taken scarcely an hour. Bramley's workshop lay but 10 miles distant, yet in that time we had already uncovered more questions than answers. Now, as the door swung open and the familiar scent of polished oak and damp earth greeted us, I felt the stirrings of anticipation. Surely this afternoon held the key to our mystery. Inside the vestibule stood Mrs. Farnsworth, her eyes bright with relief. "Monsieur Poirot, Mr. Hastings, you are back sooner than I expected." She led us through the corridor to the study, pausing at the cracked leather armchair where she had spent the previous evening. On the desk lay the serpent-headed letter opener, returned now to its velvet box, and beside it an embossed envelope bearing the unmistakable seal of Oxford University. "Ah," Poirot murmured, removing his gloves with deliberate care. "Ah, first communication from the learned Dr. Edmund Shaw, as promised. He writes concerning the inscription, Fera in Luxem. Let us see what wisdom he imparts." He broke the wafer seal and extracted a single sheet of vellum. Holding it beneath the lamp, he read, "My dear Monsieur Poirot, the phrase fera in lucem, though not classical Latin, suggests derivation from ferare, to pierce or strike, and lux, light. A more appropriate rendering might be perfide lucis, or perlucrare lucem, but I believe the artisan intended strike into the light, a direction to apply force where illumination falls. Such a motto could allude to a hidden mechanism, activated by exposure to light or by striking a particular surface. I advise you to examine the blade at various angles under bright light. Yours faithfully, Edmund Shaw, M.A. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he refolded the letter. "Strike into the light, precisely, Hastings. We must place the blade in sunlight and observe where the engraving or an aperture reveals itself. But first, madame, I should like your permission to conduct a thorough examination of the opener." Mrs. Farnsworth inclined her head. "By all means, monsieur. I can only hope it will bring clarity." We moved to the window, where shafts of dying sunlight slanted across the desk. Poirot withdrew the opener from its case and held the blade horizontally, tilting it until the light shimmered along its length. For a moment, nothing seemed amiss, until he paused, frowning. "Regard Hastings," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, a faint seam running from the hilt toward the tip, about 3/4 of an inch above the garter. I peered closely, noticing a hairline fracture in the steel that glinted like silver in the dying light. Could that seam be where the metal has been welded, or perhaps a hidden spring? "Exactly," Poirot replied. He tapped the blade gently with the tip of his thumbnail, and with a subdued click, the seam parted slightly, revealing a thin slit, a compartment. Gently, he slid the blade into the garter and with a deft twist released a catch. The section of steel around the inscription creaked, and the blade pivoted inward on a miniature hinge. My breath caught. Incredible! A secret cavity within the blade itself. From the hollow emerged a small, tightly rolled parchment, tied with crimson thread. Poirot retrieved it carefully, his gloves protecting both fingers and delicate artifact. "The very heart of our mystery, Hastings," he murmured as he unfurled the note. The handwriting was neither Mrs. Farnsworth's nor the unknown correspondent's, but distinctly masculine and angular. Beneath the serpent's gaze, seek the mirror's embrace. Only in reflection will the truth take place. I felt a thrill of exhilaration laced with foreboding. A riddle, yet it points clearly to her dressing-table mirror. Poirot replaced the parchment and resecured the compartment. "But think, Hastings, Why hide such a message? Our adversary wished that Mrs. Farnsworth discover it only if bold enough to strike the blade into the light. A test, perhaps, of her resolve, or a trap designed to draw her toward the mirror. Mrs. Farnsworth, who had watched our movements with pallid interest, reached for the note. "Monsieur, do you believe this writer means me harm? You speak of traps, of danger hidden in plain sight." He offered her a gentle smile. "Madame, the path to truth is seldom without peril. But knowledge grants power. Let us solve the riddle together." Rising, he strode to the dressing-room beyond the study. I followed, Mrs. Farnsworth clutching the note. The corridor lamps were lit now, and the rain began to tap against the windows with renewed vigour. Within the dressing-room stood the large vanity mirror that had so unnerved Mrs. Farnsworth the previous night. The glass, its silver backing slightly mottled with age, reflected us in muted tones. Poirot motioned for silence and examined the mirror's frame and surface. "Hastings, note any irregularities, loose panels, misaligned joints." I circled the mirror slowly, tapping the frame with my knuckles. "It seems solid oak, but the lower edge feels warmer than the rest of the wood." "Ah!" Poirot exclaimed, placing his ear to the panel. A faint hollow sound answered. He then pressed firmly at a knob concealed behind a carved flourish, the serpent's eye motif. With surprising ease, a concealed compartment in the frame swung inward, revealing a narrow recess lined with red velvet. From within the space emerged a small black leather pouch. Inside lay 3 objects: a tiny skeleton key, a threadbare photograph of Captain Farnsworth in naval uniform, and, most alarming, a small vial containing a dark red liquid. Mrs. Farnsworth gasped. But what is this? How did it come to be here?" Poirot laid the items on the dressing table and regarded them thoughtfully. "The key, madame, likely unlocks something of significance, perhaps a safe or desk drawer belonging to your late husband. The photograph, his naval past may hold the motive, and this vial," he held it up to the light, "appears to be laudanum or another narcotic, a deadly gift had our dear widow been tempted to ingest." Her face blanched. "He never spoke of such things, never. I had no idea he kept secrets." "Secrecy," Poirot observed softly, "is the currency of danger. Someone intended that these items be found, and that they frighten you into compliance." He turned to me. "Hastings, we have uncovered a trove of clues. The Latin motto, the hidden note, the key, photo, and vial. The question remains, who planted them, and to what end?" I nodded. "We must discover where the key fits, and why the photograph and laudanum were concealed in the mirror. I suspect Captain Farnsworth hid these items himself, but someone with access after his death could have repositioned them to mislead his widow." Poirot cradled the vial in his palm. "Indeed. Tomorrow we search the study for locked drawers or safes. Meanwhile, madame, you will remain under our protection. No harm shall come to you." She offered a wan smile, her composure steadied by Poirot's assurance. As the storm raged outside, I pondered the sinister ingenuity of our adversary. The serpent's secret had been revealed, but in its place sprang fresh enigmas. Enigmas that beckoned us deeper into a web of family secrets, naval pasts, and hidden designs. Returning the items to the compartment and securing the mirror frame, Poirot declared, Our work today has yielded precious fruit, Hastings, yet the tree of mystery grows ever taller. We climb onward. I could only agree, for in the dim glow of Farnsworth Manor, the labyrinth of hidden motives and silent threats continued to coil around us, and I knew that the next steps we took would draw us closer to the heart of a secret long concealed by darkness. Chapter 5. The Secret of the Cedar Drawer. The next morning, Farnsworth Manor seemed eerily silent, as though the house itself held its breath in anticipation of our next move. The thunderstorm had subsided overnight, leaving a damp hush in its wake. I found Monsieur Poirot already in the study, meticulously inspecting the desk by lamplight. His waxed moustaches twitched with concentration as he prodded at the veneer of the great cedar writing table. "Observe, Hastings," he said without looking up, "how this desk, so grand in appearance, conceals its true purpose. Beneath every polished simplicity lies complexity." He tapped a fingernail against the edge of the desktop, and the sound echoed through the room. "We must discover where Captain Farnsworth stored his most intimate secrets." I took the lava-black letter opener from its velvet case and placed it gently on the blotter. "The skeleton key we retrieved from the mirror chamber may unlock a hidden compartment here," I suggested, recalling the small key's finely wrought bow. Poirot nodded, folding his hands behind his back. "Exactly, Hastings. The key's design, simple yet precise, mirrors the craftsmanship of this desk. Let us begin our search." With that, he knelt before the desk, examining the carved serpentine flourish on its lower rail. I joined him, running my fingertips along the carved pattern until I found a tiny, almost imperceptible aperture. "Here!" I exclaimed. The aperture was concealed by a swirl of carved wood. Inserting the skeleton key, I turned it with a soft click. A faint mechanism clicked within the desk, and a small drawer slid outward, revealing a narrow slit lined with faded crimson felt. Monsieur Poirot clapped his gloved hands together. "Voilà! The first lock undone!" He reached inside the drawer and extracted a thick manila envelope sealed with black wax. The sealing device bore the Farnsworth family crest, a coiled serpent entwined around a dagger. He cracked the wax and unfolded several delicate papers. Inside lay correspondence bound with a slender leather thong. The top letter was addressed to Captain Charles Farnsworth, dated 6 months prior to his death, and bearing the crest of the War Office. Beneath it, smaller missives from a Mr. Rupert Conroy and a General Bertram hinted at financial transactions and hush-money agreements. I peered over Poirot's shoulder. Conroy writes of services rendered during the captain's final deployment, and Bertram mentions covering costs of certain indiscretions. These are clearly payments, possibly blackmail. Poirot nodded gravely. Indeed, the ledger Mr. Farnsworth kept must be elsewhere in this drawer. He rummaged and pulled out a slim-bound book, its spine cracked with age. Opening it, he found columns of names and figures, payments made weekly, often marked "Hold until instructed." One line caught my eye. 12th of April, $200, cancel upon death. The date preceded the captain's passing by 1 week. "Here," I whispered, "they planned to cease payments only if he died, by his own hand or otherwise." Poirot's eyes sparkled as he read the entry. Mortality used as cancellation clause. An ominous notion. But who stands to benefit most? He closed the ledger and pressed his fingertips to his temples. Madame Farnsworth has been threatened, the blade used as an instrument of fear, and now we learn her late husband was enmeshed in clandestine dealings. The question becomes, who profits by his death and by her continued terror? A sudden knock at the study door startled us. Poirot rose, careful to pocket the ledger and letters. I opened the door to reveal Miss Ellsworth, the young housemaid, her cheeks pale and her hands trembling. "Begging your pardon, sirs," she stammered. I have something to tell you about last night." Poirot invited her in with a reassuring gesture. She entered, wringing her apron. I was passing by the dressing room after lights out when I saw a shadow slip past the window. I thought it was Mrs. Farnsworth, but the figure paused at the mirror, and then, as if disturbed, it fled into the darkness. I motioned for her to sit on a chair. "Did you see who it was, Miss Ellsworth? Any detail? Height? Voice? Anything?" She shook her head, eyes wide. "It moved quickly, sir. Too quickly to see properly. But I'm certain it carried something in its hand. It vanished toward the servants' wing." Monsieur Poirot poured her a cup of tea. "Do not concern yourself, mademoiselle. You have done well to report. Hastings and I shall follow this lead." He turned to me. "Hastings, take Miss Ellsworth to the servants' wing. Let us search for signs of a visitor. Footprints, displaced items. I shall continue cataloguing these letters and decipher their true significance." I escorted the maid down the hallway, recalling her earlier testimony of whispers in the night. Outside the servants' quarters, the corridor was deserted. I lit a lantern and examined the stone floor, finding muddy footprints leading from the main corridor toward the back staircase. At the staircase landing, I discovered a scrap of black fabric caught on a nail, perhaps torn from a visitor's cloak. "Look here," I murmured to Miss Ellsworth. She gasped. I think it might be from the butler's livery." I frowned. "Nonsense, dear, but one never knows." I bagged the scrap in a handkerchief and led her back to the study. Inside, Poirot sat before the desk, spread with letters and notes. He examined the family crest on the wax seal with his loupe. "A fitting emblem for Secret Service," he mused. "The dagger and serpent, tools of subterfuge and terror." He tapped a line in the ledger. "Conroy, hold until instructed." Conroy clearly acted under orders. But whose orders? And for what ultimate gain? I produced the scrap of fabric. Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Ah, Hastings, you never cease to surprise. That cloth, fine wool with a distinctive red braid, bears no resemblance to our butler's plain black livery. Instead, it matches the uniform worn by aides-de-camp attached to General Bertram." He leaned forward. The General's aide may have slipped into the manor under cover of night. A chill ran through me. But why risk exposure? What could he hope to gain? Poirot stood and buttoned his coat, to mislead us perhaps, or to ensure that Madame Farnsworth remains unsettled while someone else searches for something else entirely. He grasped the leather-thong bundle and shook it for emphasis. Just then, the heavy study door creaked open. Mrs. Farnsworth entered, her face resolute. "Monsieur Poirot, I have decided to read my husband's journal. I believe he may have confided more in those pages than in letters." She held out a small book bound in navy leather, a personal diary she had kept hidden. Poirot's eyes gleamed with approval. "Madame, you show courage and insight. May I take a look?" He seated her in the armchair and carefully opened the diary to the first entry. The neat handwriting spoke of modest reflections, family gatherings, reflections on duty, but the final entry struck us both silent. Dated the night before Captain Farnsworth's death, it read, "Tonight I shall unveil the truth to Edith. I have hidden the evidence in plain sight. Let the serpent guide her into the light." Mrs. Farnsworth gasped. "He meant for me to find his secret. He trusted me. But someone intercepted his plan." Tears welled in her eyes. Poirot closed the diary gently and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Madame," he said softly, "your husband's intention was to protect you with knowledge. We must honour his wish by uncovering that truth, which lies elsewhere in this manor." He turned to me. "Hastings, our next step. Search every room Captain Farnsworth frequented. We seek the object he described as evidence hidden in plain sight. Only then will the serpent's guidance and the motto Fira in Lucem yield their final secret." Outside, the wind began to stir again, rattling the window panes with renewed insistence. In the flickering lamplight, I sensed that the walls of Farnsworth Manor concealed more than hidden drawers. They sheltered a conspiracy of fear, betrayal, and inheritance. And as I watched Poirot rise, determination etched upon his face, I knew that the path to revelation lay just beyond the next threshold. Chapter 6. The Portrait's Hidden Truth. The hush of early evening had fallen over Farnsworth Manor when Monsieur Poirot and I reconvened in the study. The diary and ledger, revealed at last, had been replaced in their secret cedar drawer, but both of us felt the weight of new questions pressing upon our shoulders. Mrs. Farnsworth, pale but resolute, had retired to her chambers, trusting in Poirot's promise of protection. Now, as the last rays of daylight slipped away, the great house seemed to exhale a slow, expectant sigh. "Mon ami," Poirot began, smoothing his impeccably starched cravat, "we know that Captain Farnsworth concealed his evidence in plain sight. Yet the most obvious objects, his desk, the mirror, have yielded only part of his secret. There remains one room he prized above all, the drawing-room, where his ancestors gazed down upon us from their portraits." I nodded. "The gallery of ancestors. He spent hours there, contemplating lineage and duty. If any place holds his final testament, it must lie hidden among those venerable faces." We crossed the corridor in silence, the hush broken only by the distant ticking of the hall clock. Entering the drawing-room, we were greeted by a semicircle of oil paintings. Farnsworth forebears in naval uniform, powdered wigs, and elaborate lace collars. An oversized portrait of Admiral Hartley Farnsworth, the captain's great-grandfather, dominated the east wall. Poirot approached the Admiral's portrait with deliberate poise, eyes narrowed. "Note, Hastings, how the frame differs from the others. The lion's head terminals here are more ornate, and the stretcher bars are newer. I suspect recent work." I peered at the gilded frame. Indeed, the carving seemed sharper, the gold leaf brighter. Could it conceal something? Perhaps a hidden panel? He ran his fingertips along the inner edge until his nail caught on a tiny catch. With a discreet click, a section of the frame swung outward, revealing a shallow niche behind the canvas. My breath caught at the sight of a small iron safe, its door sealed by a miniature keyhole. "Magnifique!" Poirot exclaimed. Our skeleton key from the mirror, the one of such delicate workmanship, should fit this lock. Retrieving the key from his vest pocket, he inserted it and turned gently. The safe door opened with a soft groan, and inside lay a leather pouch tied in crimson silk, and beneath it a sheaf of loose papers. I lifted the pouch and untied the silk to reveal a heavy signet ring, engraved with the Farnsworth crest and set with a deep red garnet. "His seal," I whispered. "He intended to apply this to something of great importance." Poirot nodded gravely, but turned his attention to the loose papers. He read the first page, a codicil to Captain Farnsworth's will, written in his own hand. The text declared that, should his untimely death occur, his estate and all personal effects would pass not to his widow, but to a previously unmentioned nephew, Rupert Farnsworth of Vancouver. My heart sank for Mrs. Farnsworth. "Imagine her consternation," Poirot murmured. She believed herself sole heir. Yet he arranged otherwise, hidden behind this portrait. And that ring, he tapped the signet, would validate the codicil when sealed. I rifled through the remaining papers. Correspondence between Captain Farnsworth and a London solicitor, confirming the nephew's identity and his urgent need for financial assistance. Then, a final unnerving letter, unsigned but bearing a War Office watermark, threatened to expose the captain's past indiscretions unless he agreed to the codicil's terms. "Blackmail," I said. "Someone at the War Office compelled him to divert his fortune, or else reveal his private affairs." "Yes, Hastings," Poirot replied, eyes distant. "A cruel bargain. He devised this hidden repository, his evidence in plain sight, hoping that his widow would uncover the codicil only when he deemed the time right. Instead, it fell into darker hands. He replaced the papers and ring in the safe, carefully closing and relocking it. "We must deliver these items to Mrs. Farnsworth at once. She deserves the truth of her husband's intentions, however bitter it may be." We returned to the study, where the lamp's glow offered a haven of warmth. Presenting the codicil and signet ring, Poirot spoke gently. "Madame, your husband loved you dearly, yet circumstances forced him to protect another. This codicil ensures his nephew's future, constrained by threats from within the War Office." Mrs. Farnsworth's hands trembled as she read. Tears glimmered in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "I see now that he bore burdens I never shared. He trusted me to find his final testament, and yet someone discovered it before I could." Poirot offered her the ring. "Use this to validate your husband's last wishes if you choose to challenge the codicil. But be wary. Those who threatened him may still linger nearby." As she pocketed the ring, I noticed a distant knock at the study door. Poirot and I exchanged a look. Visitors at this hour could mean either assistance or peril. I rose and opened the door to reveal Mr. Rupert Conroy, Captain Farnsworth's former aide, his face drawn and troubled. "I beg your pardon for intruding so late," he said, bowing stiffly. "But I received word of your presence, and I must speak with you regarding Captain Farnsworth's affairs." Poised and unflappable, Poirot nodded. "Monsieur Conroy, please join us. We have much to discuss, and the evening grows long." As Conroy entered, I watched Poirot's eyes gleam behind his twitching moustache. The circle of suspects had contracted to a finer point. War Office schemers, the nephew who stood to gain, and the lingering question of who had turned a loving husband's secret into a weapon of terror. In the quiet lamplit room, I realized that the threads of this conspiracy were drawn ever tighter, and at the center lay the secret hidden in the letter opener, a secret now fully revealed, yet opening the door to new dangers still cloaked in the gathering shadows. Chapter 7. The Aide's Confession. The fire in the study crackled low, casting, shifting shadows across the leather-bound volumes that lined the walls. Outside, the wind rattled the mullioned windows, as though the night itself dared to intrude upon the solemn proceedings within. I sat in the high-backed chair opposite Monsieur Poirot, who regarded our guest, Mr. Rupert Conroy, former aide to Captain Farnsworth, with inscrutable calm. Between us, the tea had grown cold, and the single lamp atop the desk threw a golden pool of light that accentuated the lines of worry etched upon Conroy's face. "Monsieur Conroy," Poirot began, his voice soft yet unyielding, "we are most obliged that you honoured our summons. Pray, be seated." Conroy sank into the chair with a hesitant gesture. His shoulders slumped as though burdened by some great weight. He cleared his throat. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I received word that you had uncovered certain documents and wished to speak with me. I understand now that you are aware of my correspondence with Captain Farnsworth." Poirot inclined, his head. "Indeed. Your letters are found within his cedar drawer. You addressed him frequently concerning services rendered, and you maintained a ledger of payments. Will you tell us, monsieur, the nature of these services?" Conroy swallowed and pressed his palms together. "I was his aide, yes, but I also acted as intermediary for arrangements that the captain preferred to keep private. Matters of personnel, payments, and occasional, delicate negotiations." "Delicate negotiations," Poirot repeated, arching an eyebrow. "You refer perhaps to those letters from General Bertram, informing the captain of sums to be disbursed?" Conroy's face blanched. "Yes, General Bertram insisted on confidentiality, personal indiscretions, financial misdealings from few years past threatened to surface unless the captain complied with certain terms. My role was only to deliver the communications and obtain funds for the General's protégés. I leaned forward, and it was you who affixed the wax seals bearing the Farnsworth crest." Conroy hesitated. "I merely redelivered what I was given. The seals, I confess, I forged them. The General provided the sealing wax. He wished the letters to appear as though from the captain himself, to guarantee compliance." He lowered his gaze. "It was deception, I admit." Monsieur Poirot steepled his fingers, and the vial of laudanum, discovered in the mirror compartment, was that part of the General's scheme? Conroy's expression flickered with fear. "No, I swear it, monsieur. That vial was never intended for harm. I delivered it to Captain Farnsworth upon his request, to ease a bout of insomnia. He trusted me with his health, as he trusted no other." He looked pleadingly at Mrs. Farnsworth, who hovered by the doorway. She withdrew slightly, hurt and confused. Poirot's gaze remained fixed on Conroy as he produced the vial from his pocket and held it aloft. This identical container was concealed within the mirror's frame. Someone placed it there for a darker purpose. You claim to have brought it to the captain, yet only after his death did it reappear among his wife's belongings. Who had access to this vial in the hours before and after his passing? Conroy's lips trembled. I delivered the vial earlier that week, yes, but I never returned to retrieve it. After the captain's death, I hurried back to the manor to pay my respects, and was informed that the vial was missing. I don't know who removed it or why. His voice cracked. I would never harm the man who placed such trust in me. Poirot nodded slowly. Yet the vial's presence in the mirror suggests it was meant to frighten Mrs. Farnsworth. A message, meddle no further, lest you suffer your husband's fate. He turned his gaze upon the flickering flames. Monsieur Conroy, pray describe your movements on the night of Captain Farnsworth's death. Conroy swallowed again, beads of sweat forming at his temples. I was dispatched from London that afternoon, summoned to bring the captain urgent correspondence. I arrived at the manor around 7 in the evening. The storm had already begun, thunder rattling the windows. I delivered the letters and the vial, then waited at the head of the stairs while he retired to his study. We exchanged no more than a few words. He seemed fatigued, more so than usual, but he expressed gratitude. I left the house to return home, convinced he would rest well. Did you see anyone else enter or leave the manor that night? Poirot pressed. Conroy's gaze flickered. No one, only the maids who retired early. I did not linger to speak with them, and when I returned the following morning to retrieve my personal effects, I learned of the captain's passing. He paused. I did not think to ask questions then. I was so shocked. I interjected softly. Yet the leather pouch and signet ring were missing until we recovered them from the portrait frame. Conroy dropped his head. Yes, someone removed them. I do not know who. When I pressed the butler for information, he vanished into the servants' quarters. Poirot's moustaches quivered. Monsieur Conroy, you have admitted to forging seals and acting at General Bertram's behest. You were intimate with the captain's affairs. Will you now confess whether you, or the General, had reason to wish Captain Farnsworth dead? Conroy's eyes lifted, haunted. I did not kill him, but General Bertram, he feared exposure. If the captain revealed certain documents, ones contained in that hidden safe, Bertram's career would be ruined. He had both the motive and the means. He glanced uneasily at Mrs. Farnsworth. I believe he visited the manor that night under cover of darkness to retrieve the codicil. He discovered the signet ring and papers, realized the captain had turned coat, and in a panic. I cannot say. I was not there. Monsieur Poirot stood and paced the study floor. This explanation, while plausible, is incomplete. General Bertram's aide slipped the vial into the mirror, threatened the widow, and ensured the motto was inscribed. Yet the actual death of Captain Farnsworth, you absolve both yourself and the General. Conroy shuddered. Yes, I only played a part in the blackmail. I never intended murder. Poirot paused, facing Conroy. Then tell me, monsieur, how came the inscription, Fera in lucem, to the blade? That Latin proverb was not present when Bramley delivered the opener. Conroy clenched his fists. I did it. I added the inscription days before the funeral in the workshop. I knew the captain's penchant for puzzles. I thought to guide Mrs. Farnsworth to her husband's secret, but I misjudged the danger. When she awoken that night to find the blade pointing at her, I feared discovery and fled. Mrs. Farnsworth gasped, You betrayed me, then guided me?" Her voice trembled. My own aid threatened me with the very blade I trusted. Conroy hung his head. "I thought I did it for love, for your protection. I did not foresee the terror it would cause." Poirot seated himself once more, eyes piercing. "Monsieur Conroy, your confession untangles some threads. You forged seals, delivered laudanum, and inscribed the blade. Yet you did not kill Captain Farnsworth. You admit to fear and regret. We must now turn our attention to the true murderer. Who, of those with access, had the stronger motive and the opportunity to administer a fatal dose?" The study fell silent save for the fire's crackle. Poirot glanced at Conroy, then at Mrs. Farnsworth, and finally at me. "Hastings, we have found the deceit of the aid. But deeper still lies the hand that struck our captain down. Tomorrow we confront General Bertram, and on that occasion I trust the killer will reveal himself." As Conroy was escorted to a guest chamber, no longer in service, but under polite restraint, I watched Poirot light his evening pipe. In the amber glow, his moustaches twitched with purpose. The aide's confession had cleared some fog, yet the darkest secrets remained concealed, and I knew that when the stage next shifted, one of the players would stand accused of treachery most foul. Chapter 8. The General's Shadow. The dawn broke chill and transparent over the rolling fields of Wiltshire as Monsieur Poirot, Mrs. Farnsworth, and I descended from the carriage before a modest but imposing Georgian villa. A thin mist clung to the clipped hedges and manicured lawn, giving the house an ethereal aspect that belied its reputation for stern discipline. Here lived General Sir Rupert Bertram, retired decorated officer of the British Army, and, as our investigation had led us to suspect, architect of the grievous plot against Captain Farnsworth. We were admitted through heavy oak doors by a stern matron of the housekeeper's department, who conducted us to the inner drawing-room. The walls were hung with battle portraits, regimental colours, gleaming swords, and stiff-limbed officers in cocked hats, each echoing the general's storied career. At the far end of the room, behind a mahogany desk, polished to a mirror, finish, stood Sir Rupert Bertram himself, his military bearing unmistakable even in half-mourning civilian dress. His grey hair was closely cropped, and his steel-blue eyes met ours with a look that volleyed between surprise and thinly veiled challenge. "Monsieur Poirot, Mr. Hastings, Mrs. Farnsworth, I confess I did not expect you so soon," he intoned, inclining his head with the measured precision of a parade ground. "I received your note, but presumed you required my testimony at Scotland Yard. To what do I owe this visit?" Poirot offered a courteous bow, advancing with his characteristic poise. "General Bertram, your prompt attendance is appreciated. We come not merely for testimony, but for truths you may find less agreeable. You will recall your correspondence with my late friend, Captain Farnsworth?" The General's expression remained composed. "I communicated with Charles Farnsworth regarding confidential matters of national security. He held certain documents, materials whose disclosure could jeopardize colleagues and regiments. I sought only to preserve honor and duty. I exchanged a glance with Poirot. The General's statement echoed the aide's earlier reference to War Office dealings. Yet the code name, Evidence in Plain Sight, and the concealed codicil suggested a more personal motive. Financial control, rather, than pure security. Poirot folded his hands. True, General, but those documents, hidden within Captain Farnsworth's cedar desk and concealed behind his ancestor's portrait, were not solely War Office dispatches. They included a clause that diverted his entire fortune upon his death. Bertram's features tightened imperceptibly. A codicil, yes, but one I neither authorized nor encouraged. Farnsworth acted of his own accord. The nephew, Rupert Farnsworth of Vancouver, was reputed to live in dire straits. Charles offered him assistance. An act of generosity, not malice. Generosity? Poirot's voice sharpened. Yet the codicil was bound by a cancellation clause. 200 Hadelans weekly, cancel upon death. A curious arrangement, General, for one friend to enrich another while exchanging threats under seal of the War Office. He produced the ledger. Read this. The General accepted the ledger with a steady hand, scanning the pages as though seeking an errant ink blot. After a moment, he returned it with a curt nod. I see the entries. My role was to ensure the funds reached their destination without scandal. I never threatened Captain Farnsworth, never suggested his death would lift the obligation. Poirot inclined his head, perhaps not verbally, yet one might question who provided the vial of laudanum hidden in the mirror, a substance capable of silencing a man's waking hours forever. He reached into his frock coat and produced the tiny vial, placing it on the desk. The General's gaze flicked to it, then fastened on Poirot. It was prescribed for sleep, Bertram said, voice measured. Delivered by Mr. Conroy, per the captain's instructions. I informed none of this had I. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Indeed, and yet the very same vial was repurposed as an instrument of terror against Mrs. Farnsworth. Someone intended her to believe her late husband took to poison, or that his death was no accident. Who stood to benefit most from such fear? The General's composure wavered. Just a flicker, but enough that Poirot observed it. I cannot say, monsieur. I was with my family that evening at a reception in Bath. Many witnesses can attest. He touched a gold locket at his breast. My honour, sir, is on the line. Poirot walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. General, you understand the value of honour. And yet without honour, one clings to wealth, position, or secrecy. Captain Farnsworth's evidence would have exposed your financial improprieties. Payments disguised as security measures to Parliament. You had motive, you had access, you had the power to forge coin, seal letters, even to instruct your aide to confound the trail. Bertram's jaw clenched. Accusations such as these. He broke off as a sudden loud crack echoed in the hallway. The housekeeper appeared at the door, grave-faced. Sir, an urgent matter. The butler, Mr. Crandall, has collapsed in the servants' hall. He was found clutching a letter addressed to Mrs. Farnsworth. The General's eyes narrowed. Let me see it. Poirot gestured toward Mrs. Farnsworth. who crossed the room to retrieve the letter from the matron's hands. With a steadying breath, she handed it to Poirot, who unfolded the cream stationery and read, "Madam, your search ends here. Reveal the codicil or suffer the consequences." The signature was scrawled, "A friend." At the bottom, a drop of what looked like fresh ink smudged the final flourish. Poirot held the letter aloft. Another threat, one more intended to provoke fear. "And dear Mr. Crandall herein lies in agony." He looked to the matron. "Has he been tended?" She nodded. "A physician is en route, monsieur. It appears he collapsed of fright, or perhaps from poisoning." Poirot turned back to the general. "Your valet delivered this letter, having found it near the gallery stair. Yet only one person with access to the main corridors at this hour was you, or someone under your command." Bertram's lips parted, as though to protest, but no words came. Poirot's gaze pierced him. "General, do you deny sending this threat, either by your hand or by instruction? If you did not, then who in your employ would risk delivering an envelope to frighten a widow?" The general's shoulders sagged. I did not send it, nor would I endanger my own staff. Crandall is loyal. He would not serve as messenger for another." He paused, staring at the letter. "If this was not my doing, then someone within the house seeks to manipulate us, to divert suspicion from the true culprit." He glanced at Mrs. Farnsworth, eyes filled with conflicted sorrow. "Edith, forgive me for what I have caused." Poirot straightened, steepling his fingers once more. "We shall soon discover the truth. Dr. Shaw of Oxford suggested a hidden mechanism, an object revealed only when struck by light. The serpent's motto, 'Strike into the light,' must guide us further. Return with me to Farnsworth Manor, General, where the final secret awaits exposure." Bertram nodded, ashen and solemn. "Lead the way, Monsieur Poirot." Outside, the wind had risen to a gust, scattering withered leaves across the lawn. Beneath the gathering gloom, the general's villa seemed to recede into a world of suspicion and half-spoken truths. Yet I felt, as I walked beside Poirot, that the net was nearly drawn. Only one final revelation remained concealed in the heart of Farnsworth Manor, where the true architect of murder and menace would at last be unmasked. Chapter 9. The Arrival of the Heir. The sun rose weakly over Farnsworth Manor, its pale light filtering through storm-washed clouds to reveal dew-drenched lawns and battered rose bushes. Inside, the corridors were alive with quiet urgency. Servants prepared for luncheon, and Mrs. Farnsworth, cradling the signet ring in her hand, met us in the hall. "Monsieur Poirot, Mr. Hastings," she greeted with calm courtesy. "I receive word that my nephew arrives today, Rupert Farnsworth of Vancouver. He claims ignorance of my husband's private affairs, yet he bears the codicil's benefits. I confess, I know not whether to welcome him." Poirot inclined his head sympathetically. "Family relations are often fraught with complications, madam. Nevertheless, every party named in the will deserves opportunity to speak. We shall observe him closely." He glanced at me, moustaches twitching. "Hastings, prepare the drawing-room. Ladies' afternoon tea shall serve as setting for our inquiry." Within the hour, a carriage along the East Drive announced the nephew's arrival. I stood by the ornate oak door as a tall, lean gentleman descended, a man of perhaps 30 years, dressed in a charcoal morning coat and polished boots, his dark hair streaked with premature silver. He carried himself with polished ease, yet his eyes darted about, betraying nervous anticipation. "Rupert Farnsworth?" Poirot inquired, stepping forward with outstretched hand. The nephew inclined his head, offering a smile that did not reach her. His eyes, "Monsieur Poirot, Mr. Hastings, Mrs. Farnsworth," he greeted, his voice smooth, tinged with a faint Canadian lilt. "I extend my condolences on my uncle's passing and my gratitude for your hospitality." He slipped inside, removing his gloves with practised nonchalance. Poirot observed the embroidery on his cuffs, the initials RF sewn with silver thread. "Your tailoring is impeccable," Poirot remarked. "May I offer you tea?" Rupert settled into a high-backed chair by the window. Through the glass I could see the storm clouds gathering once more, as though echoing the tension within. The butler served tea and fresh scones, leaving us in polite silence. Poirot poured a cup for Rupert, then turned his gaze upon him. "Mr. Farnsworth," he began, "you are named sole heir to Captain Charles Farnsworth's estate, via a codicil discovered behind his ancestor's portrait. Are you familiar with the circumstances of its creation?" Rupert's smile grew taut. He sipped his tea deliberately. "I learned of the codicil only yesterday. I was in Vancouver when Uncle Charles wrote to me, requesting assistance with my business. He mentioned having made arrangements in case of his demise, but did not specify details." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You did not suspect a cancellation clause tied to his death?" The nephew's hand tightened around the teacup. No, I did not." For the first time, I detected a tremor in his voice. Poirot nodded, pursing his lips. "Curious," he said softly. "Your uncle hid this codicil in plain sight, so that someone might discover it only when he chose. Instead, it fell into less willing hands." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Rupert's gaze flicked to the portrait of Admiral Hartley, Farnsworth, still ajar in its frame, as though that silent visage watched us. He swallowed. "I trust you will respect my right to examine the documents and signet ring, yes?" Poirot inclined his head. "Naturally. But first, perhaps you would view the photograph discovered with the laudanum vial, the one taken when your uncle was in naval attire." Rupert's face paled. "Photograph?" he echoed. I rose and retrieved the faded black-and-white image, showing Captain Farnsworth in full dress uniform, his bearing proud, eyes fixed on the camera. Beside him stood a blurred figure, too indistinct at first glance to identify. I handed the photograph to Rupert. He studied it, frown deepening. I do not recognize that man. It was taken before I was born." His posture stiffened. "Why, show this to me." Poirot's moustaches quivered. "Because the figure resembles someone who has moved among us, someone whose identity we must confirm. Tell me, Mr. Farnsworth, have you ever encountered this photograph before?" Rupert glanced, from the image to Poirot, a fraction of hesitation. "No, monsieur," he said, voice low. "Never." Poirot nodded and replaced the photograph. "Very well. Let us proceed to the portrait niche." He rose and led the way down the corridor, Rupert following with curious reluctance. I brought up the rear. As we re-entered the drawing-room, Rupert paused before the Admiral's portrait, running his fingers along the gilt frame with covert interest. "You find the frame remarkable?" Poirot inquired. Rupert gave a small start. "Remarkable, indeed," he replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "A fine piece of antiquity." Poirot tapped the frame's inner edge, releasing the concealed safe. Inside lay the leather pouch, codicil, and signet ring. Rupert's eyes narrowed. "May I see the ring?" he asked. Poirot lifted it and offered it. Rupert's hand closed around the ring, and he turned it in his palm as though weighing its meaning. "It is my uncle's mark," he murmured. I never wore it." His fingers brushed the garnet, and at his touch the stone seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight. "It is heavier than I expected." Poirot watched him steadily. "Mr. Farnsworth, you stood to gain more than any other by your uncle's death, his entire fortune. But you maintain absence of motive?" Rupert met his gaze squarely. "I had no motive to murder. Financial distress does not make for murder, monsieur. Besides, I was in Canada when he broke off, glancing toward the window. Outside, a sudden flash of lightning illuminated the garden in stark relief. In that instant, Rupert's face flickered with something like alarm. Poirot seized the moment. "Ah, a storm approaches, but here in the manor, a different tempest brews. Mr. Farnsworth, when you first learned of the codicil, did you write to anyone regarding its terms?" Rupert's eyes hardened. "I wrote only to my solicitor, no one else." Poirot nodded but pressed on. "Yet the threatening letters bear a handwriting style nearly identical to your solicitor's, except for slight flourishes." He produced the envelope marked "A Friend" and held it before Rupert. "Can you compare these alphabets?" The nephew's lips parted. He glanced at the envelope, then at the codicil's signature. His throat worked. Mr. Blake, my solicitor, writes thusly. But I assure you, I did not send that letter." Poirot stepped closer, voice low and precise. "Mr. Farnsworth, the blade's inscription was applied with a tool that leaves marks identical to those on this envelope. Furthermore, the laudanum vial delivered to the dressing-room bears traces of tobacco oil, a scent matching your gloves, noted by Mr. Hastings upon your arrival." I swallowed, recalling the faint aroma of Eastern tobacco on Rupert's gloves. The nephew's face paled to ashen ivory. He looked from Poirot to me, then to Mrs. Farnsworth, whose expression was a mixture of shock and betrayal. My gloves," he stammered. I did not realize." Poirot's eyes glittered triumphantly, yet realization came too late to prevent tragedy. "Mr. Farnsworth, you replaced the laudanum with a concentrated poison, knowing your uncle trusted his aid. You forged the Latin motto, directing your aunt to the mirror and portrait. You manipulated Mr. Conroy and General Bertram as pawns, ensuring every step served your goal." Rupert's shoulders sagged, and he let the ring fall from his grasp, the metal thudding softly on the velvet lining of the safe. "It is true," he confessed in a hollow voice. I needed the money. My business was failing. When Charles hid the codicil, I panicked. I feared he would never reveal it. I thought to frighten my aunt into revealing the documents and to kill Charles when he made his last entry. I never meant for her to suffer so." A sharp clap of thunder shook the room as Rupert's voice trailed off. For a moment, silence hung between us, heavy as the storm clouds pressuring the windows. Then Poirot exhaled in satisfaction. "Monsieur Hastings, kindly summon the constabulary," he directed. "And do have the doctor tend to Mr. Crandall, whose collapse coincides with alarm at this unravelling." I hurried away as Poirot placed a firm hand on Mrs. Farnsworth's arm. The ring's signet lay abandoned in the safe, its garnet dull in the soft lamplight. Outside, lightning forked across the sky, as though heralding the nephew's final revelation. And within the manor's ancient walls, justice at last took its measured course, guided by the smallest of details and the steadfast resolve of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 10. Justice at Farnsworth Manor. The grey dawn had scarcely broken when a discreet knock sounded at the study door. I opened it to reveal Inspector Bannister of Scotland Yard, accompanied by 2 uniformed constables. The late nephew, Rupert Farnsworth, sat bound in a chair by the fireplace, his face drawn with weariness and shame. Behind him, Mrs. Farnsworth stood pale but composed, her hand still resting on the signet ring that bore witness to treachery. Monsieur Poirot greeted the inspector with serene cordiality. "Inspector Bannister, thank you for coming so promptly," Poirot said. "Might I introduce you to Rupert Farnsworth, whom you will wish to interview in connection with the death of his uncle, Captain Charles Farnsworth?" Bannister inclined his head and stepped forward, producing a warrant. He read it aloud, for the nephew's arrest on suspicion of murder, intimidation, and forgery. Rupert bowed his head without protest. The constables stood by as Bannister cuffed him, then led him toward the door. Before crossing the threshold, Rupert paused, turning to Mrs. Farnsworth. "I am sorry, Aunt Edith," he whispered, voice thick with remorse. "I never meant for any of this to happen." His apology hung in the air, but there was no relief in her expression, only the hollow aftermath of trust betrayed. When the study door closed behind them, Poirot turned to the inspector. "Inspector, I should like to offer my observations on the sequence of events for the sake of completeness." He guided Bannister to the desk and recounted each revelation in turn. The Latin inscription, the hidden message in the blade's cavity, the compartment behind the mirror, the cedar drawer, codicil, and finally the portrait safe which concealed the ring and testament. Bannister took notes as though committing the entire narrative to the official record. "What we have here," Poirot concluded, "is premeditated murder for financial gain, orchestrated by the rightful heir, Mr. Farnsworth, with the unwitting assistance of 2 trusted associates whom he manipulated, Mr. Conroy, who delivered the poison vial and inscribed the blade, and General Bertram, whose correspondence provided the cover of national security." Bannister nodded gravely. "Your theory, monsieur, aligns well with the evidence. I will have Mr. Conroy and Sir Rupert Bertram brought in for further questioning to confirm their lack of complicity in the act of murder itself." As Bannister departed with the inspector's men, Mrs. Farnsworth sank into a chair by the window, gazing at the dark clouds swirling across the manicured lawn. Poirot approached her with gentle concern. "Madam, may I offer you comfort in this, the darkest hour?" he asked. "Your husband prepared for a future he never reached, and you have suffered more than any widow should. Yet you acted with courage and dignity. You honoured his memory by seeking the truth." She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "Hercule, you have given me back my life. I thought the manor would forever be haunted by fear. Now, though grief remains, I can look forward to a tomorrow unclouded by secrets." She paused, touching the signet ring. "I shall preserve my husband's legacy in the way he intended, by helping my nephew recover from his mistakes, if he is ever able to make amends." Poirot inclined his head. "A noble sentiment, madame. Justice must be tempered by mercy when possible." He then turned to me. "Hastings, fetch Dr. Shaw's letter from my pocket. It contains observations on the inscription's origin, material we may include in the official report." I retrieved the correspondence from the breast pocket of Poirot's coat. He read it aloud once more, emphasizing the importance of precise phrasing, that fira in lucem was an unintended Latinism derived from a mistranslation, but efficacious as a clue to a hidden spring in the blade. Bannister, summoned back briefly to claim his copy, noted the linguistic footnote for the case file. With the legal formalities set in motion, the house fell into quiet stillness. I took the opportunity to visit the servants' quarters. The butler, Mr. Crandall, still pale from his collapse, sat propped upon a chaise longue in the infirmary. A physician tended to him, nodding reassurance. "He shall recover, Mr. Hastings," the doctor said. "A combination of fright and mild poisoning, but nothing life-threatening." Relief washed over me. Crandall's loyalty was beyond reproach. In the gallery, the portrait of Admiral Hartley Farnsworth once more hung closed and secure. The tension that had gripped those ancestral visages seemed to lift, as though the weight of unspoken history had at last been acknowledged and unburdened. I paused before the Admiral's stern countenance, recalling how every frame, every painting had concealed a secret. No more. By midday, General Bertram arrived in a waiting carriage, politely escorted by 2 constables. He disembarked with measured dignity, his face set in a sombre mask. Poirot received him at the front steps. "General," Poirot greeted, voice gentle yet carrying authority. "You need only affirm that your involvement was limited to the coercion of payment, blackmail in effect, but not to the act of poisoning. Your amends to Mrs. Farnsworth and willingness to cooperate shall be noted in the file." Bertram inclined his head. "I accept full responsibility for my role in those clandestine transactions, Monsieur Poirot. I regret that my resolve faltered in the face of personal risk. I apologize to Mrs. Farnsworth and to Captain Farnsworth's memory." He turned to Edith, who offered a forgiving smile. "Thank you, General," she said. "May we all find a path forward from this sorrow." That afternoon, the lawyers and banker arrived to begin probate. Mrs. Farnsworth, flanked by Poirot and me, gave instructions. She would honour the codicil's provisions if and when Rupert Farnsworth paid restitution. But for now, she would retain full control of the estates, revenues to maintain the manor and support causes dear to her late husband. The banker, a prim woman in spectacles, took careful notes, impressed by Mrs. Farnsworth's composure and clarity. Later, in the library, I found Poirot seated by the fire, reviewing his case notes. I poured him a glass of sherry, and he waved me to a seat. "Mon ami," he began, swirling the amber liquid. "Once more we have seen how the smallest details guide us to the truth, from a tiny spot of enamel to a misplaced piece of velvet. The human heart, too, reveals its secrets in the subtlest tremors. A flicker of the eye, a hesitation in speech. I nodded. Your method of little grey cells never ceases to amaze. Yet I marvel most at your compassion. Even Rupert Farnsworth, whose actions wrought such pain, receives your sympathy. Poirot smiled wistfully. One must never lose faith in humanity, Hastings. Crime stems from fear, greed, sorrow, emotions we all share. But justice, balanced with mercy, allows us to restore balance. The clock chimed 3. A soft knock heralded Mrs. Farnsworth's return. She entered, her expression serene. Hercule, I cannot thank you enough. She placed a small envelope on the table. This is for you and Mr. Hastings. Expenses and tokens of gratitude, I insist. Poirot rose and bowed with characteristic humility. Madame, your kindness honours me. My payment is in seeing the innocent protected and the guilty held to account. He gestured to me, and my dear Hastings, who recorded these events, shall accept his fee as well. We took our leave of Farnsworth Manor as the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light upon the rose garden. Mrs. Farnsworth lingered on the steps, waving until our motor car turned the corner. The manor, once a stage for fear and deceit, stood silent in the gentle afternoon, its secrets laid bare and its burdens lightened. As we drove back toward London, Poirot sat in contemplative silence, gazing out at the passing countryside. I ventured to speak. Will you miss the case, mon ami? He turned to me, moustaches quivering with warm amusement. Missing the case, Hastings? Ah, never. For every solved mystery births new puzzles in the heart. But for now, we leave Farnsworth Manor in good hands. Yours, mine, and Madame's. Encore demain, n'est-ce pas? I laughed softly. Indeed, Poirot, until the next mystery. And in that moment, beneath a sky cleared by justice, I felt the reassuring certainty that, wherever crime dared to hide, Hercule Poirot's little grey cells would illuminate the path to truth. Chapter 11. The Final Reckoning. The morning sun glinted on the dew-soaked lawns of Farnsworth Manor, as I watched Inspector Bannister's motor car depart with Mr. Conroy and Sir Rupert Bertram, bound for Scotland Yard. The gravel driveway lay silent, but for the soft drip of rain from the eaves. Bates, Mrs. Farnsworth, her posture poised yet burdened, stood upon the portico. She turned to me with a small, resigned smile. Hastings, I cannot thank you enough for your steadfast support. The manor feels emptier without Hercules' presence, yet safer, I inclined my head. Madame, Hercule will join you presently. He accompanied the inspector to ensure that Conroy and Bertram's final statements matched the evidence. At that moment, Poirot emerged from the library, his cravat impeccably arranged, and his little grey cells whirring with satisfaction. He carried a small parcel wrapped in tissue paper. Ma chère, he began to Mrs. Farnsworth, I have secured a copy of your nephew's formal confession for your own records. He handed her an envelope bearing the War Office watermark, and from Dr. Shaw at Oxford, he added, presenting the parcel to me. A detailed paper on the origin of the inscription and the serpent motif. He believes the handle was modelled after a rare 18th-century French design, symbolizing rebirth through adversity. She accepted the papers with a nod of gratitude, her eyes lingering on Poirot's calm countenance. Your meticulous work has spared me further anguish, monsieur. He tipped his head deferentially. Justice must be precise, madam, and mercy must temper even the surest verdict. Inside the study, we found Bannister awaiting our arrival by telephone. Poirot took the receiver. "Inspector, this is Poirot. Have Conroy and Bertram confirmed the absence of third-party involvement?" He listened, nodding. "Excellent. Then we may proceed with blackmail and forgery charges against both, and the murder charge against the nephew alone. I shall appear at the preliminary hearing to affirm your findings." He replaced the receiver. "Hastings, we shall depart for London this afternoon. But first, I propose a restorative luncheon in the drawing-room. By 1 o'clock, the grand salon was arranged with silver tea service and delicate porcelain plates bearing thin slices of cucumber sandwiches and scones. Mrs. Farnsworth, radiant in a soft blue gown, presided at the head of the table, her composure restored by purpose. "I have decided," she announced, "to convert Farnsworth Manor into a refuge for wives and daughters of naval officers, those left grieving or in need of counsel. My husband would have approved." Poirot sipped his tea, moustaches twitching in approval. "A noble tribute, madam. Transforming sorrow into sanctuary honours his memory." In that moment, the house felt warmed by hope rather than haunted by fear. As we ate, Dr. Shaw's paper lay open on the side table. I retrieved it and handed it to Poirot, who began to read aloud. The inscription "Fira in luxem," while a Latin hybrid recalls the French phrase "La lumière perce l'ombre." Light pierces the shadow. The serpent handle, in her late 17th century metalwork guild, represented wisdom emerging from danger. Its task, to guide one through darkness into clarity. Poirot folded the pages and placed them before Mrs. Farnsworth. "Your husband's choice of serpent and motto, though unconventional, was poetic. He intended that, through peril, you would attain illumination." Mrs. Farnsworth pressed her fingers to the tissue-soft paper. "He always believed in symbols. I understand now that every detail was a mark of his faith in me." Just then, a discreet knock heralded the return of Bannister and the 2 prisoners. Conroy, looking gaunt but contrite, and General Bertram, bearing the quiet dignity of a fallen officer, entered under polite escort. They bowed deeply to Mrs. Farnsworth. "Madam," Conroy began, voice laden with remorse, "I accept full responsibility for my actions in blackmail and forgery. I am prepared to face the consequences." Bertram followed. "My complicity in coercion was misguided. I offer you my sincerest apologies." Mrs. Farnsworth rose slowly, her gaze searching. "You have both been instruments of pain in my husband's final chapter," she said, voice steady. "Yet I choose mercy. I will petition the court for leniency on the condition that you cooperate fully in restitution and support my charitable project." Conroy and Bertram exchanged astonished glances. Before bowing in gratitude, Poirot allowed a small smile. "Mercy, tempered by justice, madam, just as I predicted." The inspector looked on, uncharacteristically moved. He stepped forward. "Mrs. Farnsworth, your grace will be noted by the Crown. You have my respect." With the formalities complete, the prisoners were led away to be processed, while Bannister lingered to witness Mrs. Farnsworth's signature upon documents appointing trustees for the new refuge. Poirot and I watched as she inscribed her name with firm, elegant strokes, each letter a step forward from grief toward purpose. Half an hour later, alone in the library, I found Poirot leafing through Captain Farnsworth's journal. "Mon ami," he said softly, "note this final entry. May Edith find light when darkness falls." He wrote these words a night before his demise, intending them not as a warning, but as a benediction. He closed the volume and set it aside. The secret in the letter opener was never merely a puzzle, it was a testament of love. I gazed at the spotted steel blade resting on the blotter. And now its secret has served its purpose. Poirot touched the serpent's head kindly. Indeed, the instrument of terror became the instrument of truth. He slid the opener back into its velvet case. Madame Farnsworth may choose to donate it to the Museum of Naval History, where its story can guide others through shadow to light. As the clock chimed 3, I rose to gather our hats. "Shall we be off, man, ami?" Poirot donned his Homburg and sighed with contentment. "Yes, Hastings, our work here is done. The little grey cells have earned repose." He paused at the threshold, turning to look back at the Manor's facade. Farnsworth Manor stands now not as tomb of secrets, but as beacon of hope, he mused. And we, witnesses to its transformation, depart with hearts lightened. He raised a gloved hand in farewell. Au revoir, Farnsworth Manor. May your halls know laughter once more. I followed him down the drive toward the waiting motor car, glancing back at the iron gates swinging open. Behind them, Mrs. Farnsworth's silhouette appeared at the front window. A solitary figure framed by morning light, her hand raised in quiet salute. As the car pulled away, I leaned forward. "Do you think she will find peace?" I asked, watching the Manor recede. Poirot tapped his moustache thoughtfully. "Peace, my friend, is not the absence of memory, but the mastery of it. She has transformed sorrow into service. In that lies her peace." He settled back as the engine rumbled to life. "Onward, Hastings! A new case awaits." And so, beneath a sky newly bright, we left Farnsworth Manor behind, its darkest secrets laid to rest, its future shining with promise, and our hearts buoyed by the knowledge that when guided by observation, logic, and compassion, even the most tangled mysteries can yield to the light. Chapter 12. A New Dawn at Farnsworth Manor. The morning after the preliminary hearing dawned crisp and clear, as though Farnsworth Manor itself had shaken off its shroud of grief and resolved to embrace hope. I joined Mrs. Farnsworth on the terrace overlooking the rose garden, where dew still clung to petals in fragile diamonds. She wore a simple navy dress, her silver hair swept back in soft waves, and her eyes held the light of determination rather than sorrow. "Good morning, Hastings," she greeted me, her voice steady. "I have invited the first group of ladies to the Manor today, widows and daughters of naval officers, as I promised." She motioned toward the long glass conservatory, beyond the lawn, where tables were already set with fine linen and fresh flowers. "I wish to show them that life continues, that support and fellowship can flourish even after tragedy." I smiled, struck by her courage. "It is a noble endeavour, madam. Your husband would be proud." She turned, offering me a cup of tea from a silver service. "Thank you. It feels as though a weight has lifted. Last night I dreamt of Charles, not in distress, but smiling, encouraging me forward. Her gaze drifted across the horizon. I think this refuge will be his legacy, as much as the evidence he left behind. Inside the manor, Monsieur Poirot sat at the head of the conservatory table, his little grey cells momentarily at rest beneath a carefully arranged cravat. He surveyed the assembled china with an air of ceremonious approval. "Madame," he said as we entered, "your foresight in choosing this space is impeccable. Light pours in from all sides, perfect for piercing the shadows, as your husband intended with his serpent's motto." He offered her a gentle bow, and for the healing of hearts. The first guest arrived promptly at 10. Mrs. Beatrice Cole, widow of Commander Cole, recently retired from His Majesty's Navy. She stepped from her waiting carriage, pale but resolute, clutching a small handbag. Poirot greeted her and directed her to a seat beside the sunlit windows. I noted how Mrs. Cole's hands trembled slightly as she placed the tops of her gloves on the table, and how Mrs. Farnsworth offered her a comforting smile. Soon, 4 more ladies followed. Miss Evelyn Drake, daughter of a rear admiral, Mrs. Margaret Sinclair, whose husband had perished at sea, Miss Lucy Fenwick, recently bereaved, and Mrs. Nora Caldwell, widow of Captain Caldwell. Each entered with a mixture of hesitation and hope, their dark attire softened by the bright conservatory light. The sense of apprehension in the room was palpable, yet under Mrs. Farnsworth's quiet grace it softened into something like mutual resolve. As the ladies settled, Poirot rose and tapped his teacup lightly. "Ladies," he began, "you are assembled here not merely as beneficiaries of Mrs. Farnsworth's generosity, but as sisters united by the shared experience of loss. In this haven you will find counsel, companionship, and purpose." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "May the light of this room, both natural and of human kindness, guide you forward." A hush fell, broken only by the tinkling of a distant fountain in the garden. I watched Mrs. Cole unclench her fingers and allow herself a small nod. Soon Mrs. Sinclair spoke, her voice wavering at first. I feared my days of purpose were behind me, but to be welcomed here, surrounded by understanding." She paused, tears glistening. Mrs. Farnsworth reached across the table to squeeze her hand, and the spell of grief loosened its grip. For the next hour, conversation flowed, shared memories of husbands, laughter at small anecdotes, and earnest discussion of future meetings. Mrs. Fenwick suggested a monthly book club. Miss Drake offered to teach handwriting and table etiquette to the younger daughters. Mrs. Caldwell proposed a sewing circle to provide uniforms and linens to naval families. I observed Poirot's eyes sparkle with satisfaction as he sipped his tea, content that our work had borne fruit beyond mere justice. Later, Mrs. Farnsworth rose to speak again. "I shall devote this manor to your service," she declared, "hosting lectures, skill workshops, and quiet retreats. Together, we will ensure that no woman here stands alone in sorrow." She paused, gathering strength. "My husband trusted in the power of light to dispel shadow. Let us honour him by doing the same." A ripple of applause followed, and I saw Mrs. Cole dab at her eyes, renewed purpose shining through her tears. At that moment, the manor itself seemed to breathe, a living testament to transformation. After the gathering dispersed, I found Poirot and Mrs. Farnsworth alone by the fountain garden. The ladies had retired to rooms for tea and refreshment. The sun now stood high, glinting off the water's surface. Poirot regarded them both from behind a hand-rolled cigarette. "Madame, you have done what few could. You have shifted the narrative from loss to renewal. Your husband's secret, once a cause of fear, has become a beacon of hope." She smiled, acceptance mingled with quiet joy. Charles planned every detail, even his own codicil, to guide me here. Now, with your guidance, I know how to fulfill his vision. She turned to me. "Hastings, your steadfast presence has been a rock. I could not have done this without you." I inclined my head, feeling the weight of her gratitude. "It has been an honour, madam." The gentle clink of the fountain provided a musical backdrop as we stood in companionable silence. By mid-afternoon, Monsieur Poirot prepared to take his leave. The manor drive lay empty now, save for the carriage that awaited him. He clasped Mrs. Farnsworth's hand in farewell. "Madame, when next you require the little grey cells, you know where to send your summons. Until then, may Farnsworth Manor shine ever brighter." She embraced him, tears of joy and relief on her cheeks. "Thank you, Hercule." He straightened, tipping his hat, and turned to me with a flourish. "Hastings, where to next?" "London, then the café for our customary déjeuner." His moustaches quivered in anticipation. I nodded, smiling at the familiar ritual. "But first, mon ami, let us leave Farnsworth Manor in the hands of its new steward." We boarded the carriage, and as it rolled away, I looked back at the great house bathed in golden afternoon light. The rose bushes glowed, and the shutters on the conservatory stood wide, as if welcoming every new visitor. In the silence between us, Poirot exhaled. "Another case complete, Hastings, yet another lesson, that the truth, once illuminated, can heal rather than simply condemn." He paused, arching an eyebrow. "And now we resume our ordinary lives, full of small cases, big mysteries, and the pleasures of friendship." As the carriage wheels crunched over the gravel and the manor receded behind clipped hedges, I felt a sense of profound satisfaction. The letter opener's secret had led us through danger, betrayal, and ultimately to renewal. And as dawn gave way to daylight at Farnsworth Manor, so too had despair given way to hope. A new chapter in every life we had touched, and in our own as well. Chapter 13. The Invitation to Return. The morning sun shone brightly upon Wimpole Street as I made my way toward Monsieur Poirot's lodgings. After our sojourn at Farnsworth Manor, London's familiar bustle felt both comforting and oddly distant. The hansom cabs clattered over the rain-washed stones, and the flower stalls under. The archway still displayed poppies and primroses in fresh splendour. I paused outside 21B, lifted my hat, and rang the bell twice, just as I had so many times before embarking on an adventure. Poirot himself answered, impeccably dressed in a light grey suit and sporting his meticulously waxed moustaches. He beamed at me from the doorway. "Hastings, mon ami, welcome home," he exclaimed in his lilting accent, sweeping me into the warm vestibule. How I have missed the familiar comforts of Baker Street. I closed the door behind me. "And I, the steady cadence of her little grey cells," I replied, smiling. "But tell me, Hercule, Do you find the city much changed after our provincial detour?" He led me into the study, where the morning sun streamed through the bay window, illuminating the volumes on his shelves and the well-worn blotter on his desk. A pot of fresh tea and 2 cups waited on a silver tray. "Life in London proceeds much as ever, Hastings," he observed, pouring. "Yet the heart returns from Surrey enriched by purpose. And now, perhaps, our next case will find us here." He handed me a cup. "First, breakfast, n'est-ce pas?" We settled by the window, and over scones and toast chatted of small matters, a theatrical review, the latest fashions at the Ritz, and the peculiar hum of London's social season. Between mouthfuls, Poirot hummed contentedly, his gaze occasionally drifting to a silver frame on the desk bearing a sketch of the serpent-headed letter-opener, a constant reminder of our recent triumph. Before long, a knock sounded at the door. "Entrez," Poirot called. A uniformed messenger entered, holding a cream envelope sealed with the Farnsworth family crest. "Ah," Poirot murmured, adjusting his cravat. "A message from our respected client." He broke the seal with a flourish and handed me the note. The handwriting was Mrs. Farnsworth's own, elegant and decisive. I unfolded the letter and read aloud. "Dear Monsieur Poirot and Mr. Hastings, I trust this finds you both well. It is with gratitude that I write to invite you to the formal opening of Farnsworth Manor's Naval Ladies' Refuge on the 15th of this month at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Your counsel and friendship have made this endeavour possible, and it would honour me greatly to have your presence for the inauguration. Yours sincerely, Edith Farnsworth." Poirot's eyes gleamed behind his pince-nez. "An invitation to return, Hastings. Our work there did not end with one chapter. The refuge shall open, and Madame Farnsworth desires our company." I smiled and folded the letter carefully. "It would be our pleasure, Hercule. To see the refuge flourish will bring our journey full circle." He rose from his chair, setting his cup aside. "Then we must make preparations. The 15th, 5 days hence. Shall we inform Inspector Bannister to clear our calendars?" His tone was light, yet the flicker in his eyes spoke of genuine excitement. That afternoon we dispatched telegrams to Scotland Yard and to our respective acquaintances. Poirot engaged the services of a capable carriage firm and ordered our best travelling coats from his haberdasher. Meanwhile, I strolled the streets to acquire a suitable gift, an antique silver salver upon which to inscribe the refuge's name, a modest token of esteem for Mrs. Farnsworth. On the morning of the 15th, we set forth from Baker Street in a hired motor car. London's skyline receded behind us as we joined the A3 and left the city's bustle for the lush lanes of Surrey. Poirot sat alongside me, gazing out at the rolling pastures. "You know, Hastings," he said softly, "the greatest puzzles do not always require detection. Sometimes the mystery is whether the heart can heal, and today we witness that resolution in vivid form." I nodded. Madame Farnsworth found her own light beneath the shadows. It will be inspiring to see the refuge open. We arrived at Farnsworth Manor shortly before 3. The drive was adorned with banners in navy and silver, and at the foot of the steps stood a small orchestra, its violins tuned to a gentle prelude. The rose bushes bloomed in homage to our return, pale pink, cream and crimson petals shimmering in the afternoon sun. A discreet throng of guests, naval officers, their families, local dignitaries, and the beneficiaries themselves gathered on the lawn. As we stepped out of the car, Mrs. Farnsworth emerged on the portico, radiant in a dove-grey silk gown. Her silver hair was adorned with a spray of white lilies. She offered me her gloved hand. "Welcome back," she said, her smile genuine and warm. "Thank you for coming." Poirot exchanged a brief bow. "Madame, to witness this day is a privilege." He turned to me. "Hastings our formalities." A hush fell as we approached the garden steps. Mrs. Farnsworth took her place beside a podium draped in navy velvet. Beside her, the beneficiaries, stood Mrs. Cole, Miss Drake, Mrs. Sinclair, Miss Fenwick, and others, each poised with gentle anticipation. At Mrs. Farnsworth's signal, the orchestra commenced a soft flourish. She raised her hand and spoke clearly into the hush. "Distinguished guests, dear friends, and honoured beneficiaries, today we inaugurate Farnsworth Manor's Naval Ladies' Refuge. What began in sorrow has blossomed through shared purpose. May these halls offer you comfort, counsel, and camaraderie in days ahead." A ribbon of silver and navy spanned the entrance to the conservatory. Mrs. Farnsworth turned to me and handed me a pair of scissors tied with a satin bow. "Monsieur Hastings," she said, "will you do me the honour of cutting the ribbon?" I stepped forward, bowed respectfully, and with a gentle snip severed the ribbon. Applause rippled across the assembly as I removed the scissors and presented them back to Mrs. Farnsworth. The doors to the conservatory swung open, revealing the sunlit interior set with tables, bookshelves, and comfortable chairs, spaces for reading, sewing, and quiet conversation. Inside the conservatory, guests mingled with soft laughter. Mrs. Farnsworth offered Poirot a place at her side as she gave tours of the rooms. He admired the ladies' workstations. A writing desk here, a sewing table there, each named for a benefactor or in memoriam. "Ingenious arrangements," he murmured, inspecting the brass label on a mahogany writing stand. "Your vision, madam, has taken splendid form." I followed Mrs. Cole into the sewing nook, where bolts of navy cloth lay ready for uniforms. She showed me a sampler of hand-stitched insignias, her fingers deft despite earlier tears. "We offer practical skills," she explained, "so that daughters may assist in regimental needlework, and widows may earn small stipends for mending." I nodded, impressed by the scope of the project. Beyond the sewing room lay a small library. I found Miss Drake arranging volumes of naval history on low shelves for easy access. "Knowledge sustains the soul," she said, offering me a selection of books authored by women serving as war correspondents. I accepted one, a memoir by Florence Nightingale, and promised to return it promptly. In the hearth-room beyond, General Bertram stood quietly among the beneficiaries, an expression of thoughtful contrition upon his face. He had been invited to serve as an honorary trustee. Catching my eye, he offered a brief nod of thanks, as though welcoming the opportunity to redeem himself through service. I returned the nod, appreciating his willingness to shoulder responsibility. Meanwhile, Poirot moved among the guests with his customary blend of charm and keen observation. He paused to praise the floral arrangements, white lilies and blue irises reflecting the refuge's colours, and to congratulate the master of ceremonies on the smooth orchestration of the event. I noted how each compliment was carefully calibrated to draw a smile from its recipient. After an hour of tours and introductions, Mrs. Farnsworth called for attention once more. She invited a young girl, Lucy Fenwick, to recite a poem she had composed for the occasion. The child stepped forward, voice trembling yet strong, and spoke of light conquering darkness. Tears glistened in Mrs. Farnsworth's eyes and in mine. When the applause subsided, Poirot leaned close. A most appropriate tribute, Hastings. The serpent's motto realized at last in verse. I watched as Mrs. Farnsworth embraced Lucy, her maternal pride shining. As the festivities wound down, guests strolled the gardens, sampling tea and delicacies prepared by the manor's chefs. Poirot and I stood together on the terrace, surveying the scene. You see, Hastings, he said softly, how grief can be transformed into community. Each life here will now bear witness to hope. I nodded. It is a triumph beyond mere detection, a restoration of faith. Mrs. Farnsworth approached, her entourage in tow. She offered us each a small bouquet of white lilies. Thank you, Hercule Hastings. Your presence has honoured us beyond measure. Poirot accepted his, placing it carefully in his buttonhole. I tucked mine into the lapel of my coat. The sun dipped toward the horizon, and the orchestra struck up a gentle waltz. Couples formed on the lawn, their steps hesitant at first, then flowing in easy grace. Mrs. Farnsworth joined the dance, supported by General Bertram. The strain of recent weeks softened into a hopeful smile. As I watched her twirl, I felt the full circle of our journey, from letter opener's terror to this garden's jubilation. When the final chords faded, Mrs. Farnsworth approached us once more. Would you honour me with one last dance, Monsieur Poirot? Her invitation was both playful and sincere. He took her hand with courtly deference. I offered to escort her back toward the manor, but she shook her head. No, Hastings, you join us. I murmured apologies, then stepped forward. The three of us formed a small set, dancing a gentle allegro across the grass. The world seemed to tilt toward joy, and for a moment the shadows that had once plagued Farnsworth Manor lay vanquished beneath the gentle glow of human kindness. As the clock in the tower chimed 5, Mrs. Farnsworth gently concluded the dance. She turned to us, fatigue softened by serene contentment. This has been the happiest day since my Charles's last letter. I shall never forget your kindness. Poirot bowed. Madame, we have merely followed the path he laid, a path of light, compassion, and renewal. Chapter 14. The Scales of Justice. A clear autumn morning greeted us as Monsieur Poirot and I stepped from the waiting carriage onto the steps of the Old Bailey. The building's austere facade, its columns and pediment carved with the words justice, stood as a solemn testament to the day ahead. We had arrived early, for the sessions concerning Rupert Farnsworth and his co-defendants were scheduled to begin at 10 o'clock sharp. Mrs. Farnsworth had elected to remain at the manor, confident that the refocused purpose of her refuge would carry on without her presence. Still, she had asked us to represent her support in the gallery, lending her moral backing to the cause of measured justice. Inside, the oak-panelled corridors thrummed with the muffled footsteps of officers, clerks, and the occasional public spectator. Poirot paused to offer a discreet bow to the usher, who nodded in recognition. We took our places in a private box above the dock, affording a clear view of the dock, the bench of magistrates, and the crowded public gallery. I noted the presence of Inspector Bannister, his notebook at hand, and the two constables who had conveyed General Bertram and Mr. Conroy. The bailiffs herded them into separate docks, one for Mr. Conroy, the other for the General, while the nephew's dock sat central, its mahogany rails worn smooth by repeated contacts with anxious hands. At exactly 10 o'clock, the court clerk called the roll. Sir Rupert Farnsworth, charged with blackmail and manipulation, entered his plea of guilty. Conroy followed suit, his head bowed, voice steadier than I expected. Then the nephew, Rupert Farnsworth, was called. He stood and, with measured tone, admitted to the counts of wilful murder and forgery. For a moment, silence fell so profound, I fancied I heard the distant ticking of the clerk's desk clock. The magistrates exchanged glances, then rose to deliver the terms of their sentences. First came Mr. Conroy. 2 years' imprisonment, suspended for 5 on condition of good behaviour, and restitution of the sums misappropriated. The judge praised Conroy's cooperation and genuine remorse, remarking that his actions, while unlawful and reprehensible, had been motivated by misplaced loyalty. Applause rippled through the gallery before dying away. Conroy bowed his thanks, tears glimmering in his eyes. Next stood General Bertram. The judge delivered a stern reprimand, admonishing him for misusing his office and subjecting the Farnsworths to undue fear. He was fined a substantial sum and relieved of certain ceremonial duties, but escaped imprisonment in consideration of his prior service and unblemished record. The general bowed respectfully and returned to his dock with a heavy exhalation, his countenance grave yet accepting. All eyes then turned to Rupert Farnsworth, the nephew. The magistrate's tone was even but firm. In the matter of Captain Charles Farnsworth's tragic death, Mr. Farnsworth, your betrayal of familial trust, your premeditated malice, and the consequent loss of life require a sentence commensurate with the gravity of your crime. He pronounced a custodial term of 18 years, with the possibility of early release for exceptional conduct. Rupert's shoulders slumped. He did not faint or protest. He nodded in acknowledgment, his pale face betraying a depth of regret that no courtroom drama could fully convey. As the gavel fell, I sensed a collective release of tension. The gallery murmured with hushed commentary, praise for the balanced sentences. Relief for Mrs. Farnsworth's dignity upheld, and sorrow for the nephew's downfall. Poirot offered me a slight smile, his eyes reflecting satisfaction at the just outcome tempered by mercy. We took our leave of the court, passing beneath the great dome as the afternoon light filtered through the stained-glass lunette. Outside, I offered Poirot my arm. A fair balance, Hercule, justice served, yet tempered with compassion. He nodded gravely. Precisely, Hastings. The law must uphold the sanctity of life, yet also recognize the potential for redemption. He paused, glancing back at the courthouse steps. And now, my friend, the final chapter awaits at Farnsworth Manor, where the true measure of mercy will unfold. That evening found us once more at 21B Baker Street, reflecting on the day's events over a late supper of cold chicken and fresh bread. Poirot poured 2 glasses of claret and raised his to mine. To the scales of justice, ever in delicate balance. I clinked my glass and drank, the rich wine fortifying my spirits. To 15 chapters, mon ami, and to the dawn beyond. He folded his hands and fixed me with a thoughtful gaze. You know, Hastings, the case of the letter opener has taught us more than the exposure of a murderer. It has reminded us that every human being, however flawed, carries the capacity for good and for remorse. He stood and retrieved from his desk a small sealed envelope bearing Mrs. Farnsworth's handwriting. She writes that she will visit London tomorrow to convey her own remarks at Rupert Farnsworth's Council of Appeal, a reflection of her charity in even the darkest of circumstances. I opened the envelope and read her brief note. Dear Monsieur Poirot and Mr. Hastings, my nephew's sentence must stand, but I shall advocate for his advance to a charitable colony where he may learn to repay his debts to the world. I should be honoured by your company at that address, if you are so inclined. With gratitude and hope, Edith Farnsworth. I looked up at Poirot. She continues to extend mercy beyond measure. His moustaches quivered in approval. A singular woman, Hastings, her light pierces every shadow, even those within the human heart. He replaced the letter in its envelope. Tomorrow, then, we accompany Mrs. Farnsworth to the Colonial Appeal Office. But for now, we rest. As I unrolled my blankets that night, I reflected upon the human cost of this case. The nephew's fall from grace, Conroy's despair, Bertram's shame. Yet all had been met with opportunities to atone. I felt a profound gratitude for the justice system's capacity to forgive, and even more for the wisdom of Hercule Poirot, who had guided us not only to the revelation of truth, but to its kindest expression. And so, under a moonlit sky above Baker Street, I drifted to sleep confident that, when morning came, our final chapter would unfold with equal measures of compassion and closure, and that the light of Farnsworth Manor's refuge would shine ever brighter for those in need. Chapter 15. A Legacy of Light. The dawn of October's first clear morning found London crisp and bright, as if the city itself had breathed a sigh of relief. I joined Monsieur Poirot at Baker Street, where a hansom cab awaited to take us to the Colonial Appeal Office. In my satchel lay Mrs. Farnsworth's letter of appeal on behalf of her nephew, and in Poirot's hand he carried a small velvet case containing the serpent-headed letter opener, a final emblem of the journey that had brought us here. So, drive through the waking streets offered time for reflection, and I glanced at Poirot, who stared steadily ahead, moustaches quivering with anticipation. Mon ami, I ventured, today we bear witness to the last act of this drama. Our presence shall no doubt strengthen Madame's petition. He inclined his head, tapping his fingers together. Indeed, Hastings, it is fitting that mercy, having guided us thus far, should find its ultimate expression in a measure of clemency for our young nephew, provided he shows the willingness to amend his ways. At the appeal office, a stately Georgian building on Pall Mall, we found Mrs. Edith Farnsworth awaiting us in the entry hall. Her composure was serene, yet there was a quiet tension in her eyes. She welcomed us with a warm smile and led the way into a small hearing room where two colonial commissioners sat behind a polished mahogany table. Between them, the crest of the British crown gleamed in relief. After brief introductions, Mrs. Farnsworth rose and presented her case. She spoke of her nephew's contrition, of the mercy she had already shown in petitioning the court for suspended sentences, and of the purpose of the marine refuge she maintained at Farnsworth Manor. "My nephew," she said, "has the opportunity, in a disciplined settlement abroad, to learn service, not only to repay the sums he misappropriated, but to devote himself to the care and sustenance of those who follow in his uncle's footsteps. I believe that with guidance and toil he may transform his guilt into a life of usefulness." The commissioners conferred in muted tones, their expressions inscrutable. I observed the young Rupert Farnsworth seated beside his aunt, his hands clasped so tightly I feared they might blanch. At length one commissioner nodded and spoke. "Mrs. Farnsworth, your plea is most unusual in its combination of justice and compassion. We are prepared to grant your nephew conditional parole on the understanding that he undertake a 7-year term at the Admiralty Agricultural Settlement in New Zealand under the supervision of the Colonial Service. Should he fulfill his obligations honourably, he may return to claim a modest portion of his inheritance to which your aunt has graciously renounced her claim." A hush fell. Mrs. Farnsworth's eyes glistened. She bowed her head. "I accept these terms with gratitude and promise to support him in every way possible." Rupert rose, voice tremulous yet earnest. "Madam, I shall not fail you. I will endeavour to justify your faith." His gaze found mine and Poirot's, and in that moment I saw a spark of resolve, fragile yet determined. With formalities concluded, the commissioners affixed their seals and shook hands with Mrs. Farnsworth. As we took our leave, Rupert paused in the corridor. He slid the velvet case from Poirot's coat pocket and held the letter-opener reverently. "This object," he said haltingly, "reminds me of the journey that led to my downfall, and to my chance at redemption. I shall carry it with me as a talisman of the light I must now pursue." Poirot inclined his head. "May it guide you, nephew, as it guided your aunt through darkness." The carriage took us back through the heart of London. We spoke little on the way. The weight of the morning's events demanded silence. Upon returning to Baker Street, Poirot rang the bell, and, in a gesture of profound gratitude, handed me a business card. "Hastings," he said, "when the time comes for Rupert Farnsworth's return, he may wish to consult us again. Keep this." The card bore the insignia of a London shipping line to Auckland, and the inscription, "For assistance in colonial affairs." That evening, I sat by my own hearth, writing in my journal, recording the final terms of the appeal order. Across the fire, Poirot sat in his armchair, poring over a letter from Mrs. Farnsworth containing news of a young widow who had found employment at the refuge, and a request for Poirot to consider a small emblem for the new settlement, a stylized serpent coil rendered as a badge for the apprentices. He looked up, moustaches quivering. "See, Hastings, how the serpent's coil endures, no longer a weapon of fear, but a badge of learning and hope." Weeks later, autumn's russet had deepened across Surrey's lanes, and Poirot consented to accompany me on a final visit to Farnsworth Manor before Rupert's departure. The refuge stood vibrant under a silver sky. The conservatory hummed with activity. Sewing circles met in the hearth-room, and the rose garden's final blooms glowed against the golden-brown hedges. Mrs. Farnsworth greeted us warmly, presenting us to a group of beneficiaries and staff who paused their tasks to offer thanks. In the sewing nook, I found Mrs. Beatrice Cole adjusting the hem of a naval officer's uniform for a young widow whose husband had recently passed. Beatrice offered me a nod of recognition. "Your work," she said quietly, "gave me purpose. I now help others find theirs." Nearby, Miss Drake led a lesson in penmanship for the daughters of serving officers. Their nibs scratched eagerly across lined pages. Poirot wandered among them, offering observations on the precise alignment of buttons, the evenness of stitches, and the geometry of floral arrangements. "Attention to detail," he pronounced, "whether in detection or in embroidery, is the key to excellence." The beneficiaries laughed softly, charmed by his enthusiasm. We were led into the drawing-room for a small tea. There, Mrs. Farnsworth stood to address us, placing in Poirot's hand a beautifully embroidered serape bearing the serpent coil badge. "For Rupert's settlement," she explained, "may it serve as a symbol of his task." She then took my arm and led me to a window overlooking the garden path. "Hastings, your calm counsel helped steady me when I felt adrift. I cannot thank you enough." She pressed my hand. "Your presence here means more than words." As the afternoon waned, we strolled along the terrace. A gardener paused to tend the chrysanthemums. Wood-pigeons cooed in the elm above. Poirot inhaled deeply. "See, Hastings, nature recovers swiftly when given a chance." I nodded. "And so do hearts when kindness follows cruelty." He tapped his moustache. "The little grey cells rejoice in such renewal." At twilight, we bid farewell to Mrs. Farnsworth and the beneficiaries. In the carriage, Poirot spoke softly. "There is a satisfaction in ending a case not with merely the exposure of guilt, but with the blossoming of hope." I looked back at the Manor's silhouette against the crimson sky, its windows aglow with lantern light, the very image of sanctuary. In London, we returned the carriage and walked hand in hand, figuratively speaking, along Baker Street toward the gaslit warmth of 21B. There, by the hearth, the serpent-headed letter-opener rested in its velvet case atop Poirot's desk, a testament to the journey's end. He paused in the lamplight, peering at the blade's polished curve. "Mon ami," he sighed, "all chapters must close, yet the story of human kindness continues beyond our pages." He offered me his characteristic smile. "I look forward to our next mystery, wherever it may lead." I raised my teacup. "To the little grey cells, and to light eternal." He clinked his cup against mine, moustaches quivering with delight. Outside, a soft November drizzle began to fall, but within, the glow of lamplight and friendship remained unwavering. Thus concluded the tale of Hercule Poirot and the secret in the letter-opener, in which fear was transformed to compassion, secrets to service, and every shadow yielded to the promise of a new dawn. I offered my arm, and now let us take our leave, with hearts lightened by the promise of tomorrow. Together we walked the flagged terrace towards the waiting motor-car, the palace gates swinging open as though in blessing. I glanced back at Farnsworth Manor, conservatory windows glowing, the rose garden alive with laughter and light. Under that new dawn, sorrow had found solace, and a new chapter had begun. As the car rolled away, I knew that though our case had ended, its legacy would endure in the lives Jennifer Farnsworth had touched. And in that enduring transformation, the true power of truth and compassion lay revealed, ever guided, as Captain Farnsworth intended, by the light that pierces every shadow.